All right, welcome to today's meeting. We've got a very exciting topic that I think everybody will want to hear. So welcome. Let's talk a little bit about the League of Women Voters. Okay, let's see, we've been around for over 100 years. Most of you do not know. It was then, and it still remains to be, even though it's very challenging in these times, it's a nonpartisan organization. We don't support any political party, less a political candidate, but we do research and address and support issues that have been thoroughly investigated at the national level. So next on here, let's say our mission is to empower voters and let's say to defend democracy, and we envision a democracy where people have essentially, let's say, the knowledge, let's say, the ability, let's say, to participate in government and the willingness, and some of these educational sessions that we have hopefully will help you to do that, to empower voters to become involved in this. We also believe in the ability, let's say, of the power of women and men, for those men who are in the audience as well, let's say, to create a perfect democracy. We are one of over 750 local leagues. There's 50 state leagues, plus one in DC, let's say, as well as, let's say, the U.S. Virgin Islands. There's over 500,000 supporters. Those of you who are members of our league, just know that your membership dues help us, to do at the national, and the state, and the local level, to do a lot of the work that we do, including advocacy as well as lobbying for this one, as well as some lawsuits, okay, and from time to time. So appreciate those of you who are members, those who are here who are just trying this on for science. We would love to have you as a member. So let's talk about the Northeast Tennessee League. Geographically, we cover 8 counties. There are 3 counties we don't have members in. It's pretty spread out, but we're heavily focused in Washington County and Sullivan, but we have members from 3 of the other counties. But the outlying counties, at some point, we will do an outreach there. As far as the people, we have over 80 members. You'll see some of their smiling faces up here. 12 of those members are on our board. The people that set the priorities and do a lot of the heavy lifting. I'm Candace Tanner, I'm the president, but I couldn't do my job without the support of these people. And anybody here on the board, if you would stand at this point, so just look around, for anybody that stands. These are the 12 hardworking members. We've got 2 that are not here today, Wynn and Dave. But these are the people that do the heavy lifting. We also reach over 400 people with our newsletter. If you're not on the newsletter list, it's free of charge, access. Please sign up at the table at the back. It has a lot of really, really good information that we can't cover in a typical league meeting. So I want to go ahead and highlight a couple of events that are coming up in September. We have lunches with the league on a monthly basis, and we try to rotate around the Tri-Cities area. The next one's going to be in September at Ellen's Kitchen Table, in Kingsport. Christina Runsman and Sharon Brown are the hostesses for that. See the newsletter, and even if you can't RSVP, just show up at Evelyn's Kitchen at 11:30 on September the 12th. Second one is the Umoja, or Unity Festival in Johnson City, coming up on September the 12th. Bob, where are you, Bob? Okay, well, he's around here. You'll see him with the League of Women Voters shirt. He is actually asked if anybody has a convertible that you would be willing for people to ride in, for some of these events, but also need some help with the Umoja Festival on that. So if you'd like to volunteer, even if you're not a member, just to help table and hand out information about voting rights and other issues, see Bob. He'll be back in a minute. I'll point him out to you. Okay, Constitution Day. You saw as you came in on the table, the little pocket constitutions. So we are going to be partnering with local libraries. I don't have the final list yet, but I'm sure it'll be Kingsport, Johnson City, and some of the outlying areas on September the 17th on that one. So look for us there in the library. Now, September 21st program, this is next month, but we wanted to go ahead and highlight this. We'll have Heather Evans from the University of Virginia Wise, and she will be doing a program on competitive elections and democracy in America. A continuing theme with what we're starting today. All right, these are just a few housekeeping rules. We do live stream this on Facebook. You don't want to be seen. You're not going to be focused. The camera's focused on the speaker only. But if people recognize your voice, okay, you will be heard if you ask any questions. So I just wanted to just make you aware of that. It's also posted on YouTube after the meeting. Please help yourself to the refreshments in the back. You'll see a donation basket. About 1/3 of our annual budget for expenses are essentially let's go toward renting this facility along with food. So any small donation would be appreciated to help defray those costs so we can use the money for some other outreach programs. Restrooms in the back behind those walls there, just go all the way back into the right. And on the table that you signed in when you came in, there's plenty of handouts. Please take the pens, the handouts, anything you have. The pocket constitution, they're always handy. Let's see if they have one available. Certainly my 8th grade grandson doesn't appreciate the fact that I always carry one and quizzing every week. So something that's going to be a little different starting next month. The board meets monthly and we have a lot of time to really get to know each other. We felt like maybe you guys needed that opportunity as well. So starting next month, you can show up at 1:30. We'll try to have everything set up. If you just want to mingle, get to meet some of the other, let's say, board members or some of the other members, ask questions that you don't normally have time in meetings like this. But we're going to start that as a way, let's maybe to get to know each other a little bit better, starting next month. Same place, yes, here. It will be the same place. Yeah, the program will still start at 2. So we'll have 30 minutes to mingle, chit chat. A couple of us maybe are getting everything set up, but we will start promptly with the program at 2 o'clock. So I'm gonna hand this over to Ramsey. She's going to introduce today's speaker.
Gail is a former CIA political analyst with almost 12-year career. She currently is the director of Intelligence and Security and Intelligence Studies program at King. I would argue that as our mission is to defend democracy, she has been a democracy defender as a public servant and as an educator, trying to further knowledge and understanding of issues related to what are the threats or supporters for a healthy, democratically functioning governmental society. So I'm not going to take any more time than to say we are very pleased to have her with us, and I think we all stand to gain a lot from her presentation. Gail Helt.
Before I get started, I am very delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. And I do want to say, given my former employment at the CIA, I just want to stress, anything I say here is my own views and is not rooted in any classified information. And I also am only representing my views. I do teach at King now. I don't represent the university in this particular talk. So, okay, let's just dive into democratic backsliding. We're seeing it continuing at a pace, right? I mean, I'm seeing things now that really terrify me. And when I was talking, one or two of you mentioned an article that I had written in 2020, and because I did see this coming, because I have watched this in authoritarian countries. My account at the CIA was China and Taiwan, right? So I do know what it looks like when a country is either, diving farther into the depths of authoritarianism, as China has done under Xi Jinping, and also when an authoritarian country democratizes, as Taiwan started to do just a little bit under Chiang Kai-shek, and then under his son, and then not long after they were having free and fair elections. And Taiwan's democracy is a beacon of democracy for all of Asia. I mean, it's really amazing what Taiwan has done. And so I've seen all of this happen. I've watched Malaysia, I've watched other countries, and what I've seen here in the last 6 months is so far beyond what I imagined I was going to see in 2020, that it really is unnerving, right? This is something I think I've always taken our democracy for granted in ways that I probably shouldn't. Maybe we all have to a certain degree. But before I dive in, let's make sure I've got the right. There we go. It was my thumb. No, it was my thumb. I want to get a couple of definitions out here, because I know that we all use words, and we all generally know what they mean, but sometimes we all have a little bit of a difference in how we define these things in our minds. So I want to get these out there. I want to see which one's first. Democracy, a definition definition of democracy that I basically hinge my framework on, the minimal definition, and hopefully it's better than this, but the minimal definition is a country with some level of meaningful suffrage, right, meaningful voting rights, with a leader who's either elected by a majority of parliament or periodic free and fair elections. Now, obviously, the exceptional side, an exceptionally strong democracy is going to have universal suffrage, right? Not just some level of suffrage, but regardless, there's got to be some level of suffrage there for a country to be called a democracy. Autocracy is a government where absolute power could rest with one person, a dictator, a monarch. It could technically rest with a leader who's backed by a party. It doesn't have to be like, Kim Jong-un, right? That's like the extreme example of an autocrat. There could be minority parties that are allowed to exist, but those parties really don't have a whole lot of control. And then fascism, the scary F word, right? It is a frightening word to me, especially now. A cult of personality where the state controls economic resources and who gets access to them, who gets the benefits of state, subsidies, tax breaks, benefits of tariffs or not. The ruling party controls the education and the media, or at least strongly influences it. And it's also a system that thrives on an us versus them kind of mentality, right? You have to divide the people. You have to, I'm looking for a phrase that probably won't come to me, but you have to basically prove to usually a majority of your population, but not always, that you are the party of them, right? It can be a very populist kind of movement. And there is certainly a nationalistic underpinning to a fascist regime. You might hear people say phrases like blood and soil, they are vermin, right? Those kinds of phrases, which are just totally repulsive to me, and I cringe when they come out of my mouth. And then frequently, not necessarily always, but frequently religion and the state are linked somehow. And you can see this in Mussolini's Italy, where Mussolini had a very close relationship with the Pope. And there's actually a really good book that I would recommend. And of course, I'm going to blank on the author's name, but the book is called Mussolini and the Pope. And it's very thick. Don't let that scare you. It's really an easy read because it's so well written and it's so interesting. When I picked it up, I was like, can I get through a book like this? But I did, it's thick. I got through it really, really fast. The author is brilliant. And he had this really weird relationship with the Pope. And basically, as long as Mussolini was willing to give the Pope access to the schools, to hospitals where there would be a crucifix on every wall, same as school classrooms, right? Other perks like that. The Pope was very happy to basically prop up Mussolini and never say a negative word about him. So that's basically what a fascist regime looks like. There we go. Now I want to move into, just really quickly, because we're talking about democratic backsliding, I want to stress there have been waves of this, right? There's waves of democratization in the world that have occurred, and there's waves of democratic backsliding that have occurred. The first wave, and I'm not going to go too deep into this, happened from 1828 to 1926. I don't have these dates memorized, I have to look. And that basically started after the Enlightenment, after the American Revolution, after the French Revolution, where, concepts of personal freedom, of civil liberties, began to kind of become widespread, known about, respected. People started demanding those things, right? Don't just talk about them. Let's not just philosophize about them. Let us create governments that reflect this, that actually support the people, right? The French Revolution, the notion that and ours, frankly, the notion that the state, the head of state, should be a reflection of the people. There should be no mandate, no monarchy, no heredity, or as was the case in some Asian countries, no mandate of heaven where whoever manages to skirmish to the top can automatically claim that, well, God allowed it, so clearly God has ordained it. right? So they don't want any of that anymore. They want governments led by the people that are supporting the people. And then the first wave of democratic reversal starts in 1922 with Mussolini's March on Rome. Mussolini has a interesting past, right? He did dabble in socialism for a little while, just very briefly. I knew that was going to go. I'm going to let that there because I think it's not this day. He did dabble. I believe he published a socialist magazine or pamphlet or something for a while, but he realized. Number one, he realized he wasn't really a socialist. Number two, he realized he could probably gain some power by opposing socialism. And so he goes over to the fascist world, right? He gets these, and to be fair, there were socialist, communist, inspired crime, I'll just say, communist gangs. There was some violence in Italy. I'm not going to say that there wasn't. But his response to that was to create fascist squads, to go out and basically take on the communists, take on anybody who was deemed to be Marxist. It didn't matter if you were engaged in violence or not after a while. And at some point, Mussolini decides that he deserves to take power of Italy, so he plans this march on Rome, and he is going to go basically demand that the king give him the prime ministership, and then eventually he's going to take over the head of state position in Italy. And the king was just like, I don't know about this. But then he realizes that Mussolini's squadristas are poised around Rome. There's been a lot of drama, a lot of violence, a lot of anger. The economy of Italy was not doing well. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And he's like, let's give this a try. And so he gives Mussolini the authority to do what Mussolini wants to do. His squads don't actually have to engage in a violent takeover of Rome, but he basically invites them in, and they become his police force. They become basically the people who have the control of Italy in many, many ways. Not necessarily formally, at least at first, although those people will get pulled into government, some of them. But that's the start of the first reversal, right? Italy was a democracy. It did democratize in that first wave. It felt like it got screwed over by the Treaty of Versailles, and that's why Mussolini was able to get a lot of other people to support his fascist regime, right? There was one huge grievance. It wasn't just him being in the right place at the right time. There were events that had happened that had transpired that his government was not able, Italy's government was not able to control, to get a handle on. They weren't strong enough to leverage a good outcome from the Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I. Right? They actually had made some demands, and that the rest of the Allies led Italy on to let them believe that they were going to give in to their demands, which were basically territory. Dalmatia, part of Albania, a couple of other regions where there were a lot of Italians and a lot of Italian presence. We didn't follow through. Now, one of the reasons we didn't follow through is because Italy didn't follow through and get involved in World War I until the very last days. So they sort of, pardon the expression, screwed us over too, but they were really, really angry about that. And the people of Italy were really angry about that their people, that their representative leaders could not, their democratically elected leaders could not do better for them. So that leads to a first wave of democratic reversal that happens across Europe, a couple of other countries as well. The second wave of democratization happens from 1943 to 1962, which is like the middle of World War II towards, basically the first half, first two-thirds maybe, of the decolonization era, where countries that had formerly been colonies, but largely of Great Britain, were getting their freedom, they were getting their independence, and they were embracing democracy, largely because we were pushing for that. We did have programs to encourage them to become democratic. Hey, join this band, join with us, don't join the Warsaw Pact over there, don't join the Soviet Union over there, don't get on their side. And so we were able to see a pretty significant second wave of democratization. That wave starts to reverse by 1958 through 1974, when the Soviet competition starts kicking off, right? So there is some Cold War competition competition that leads to some reversals there. And then the third wave of democratization begins in 1974 and lasts till about 1990. That reverse, and that's of course, I should just skip over that. Excuse me. That is of course towards basically detente is happening in the Cold War, and there is the collapse of the Soviet Union towards the end of the 80s, the early 90s. So this is basically reflecting that. There's a little bit of additional decolonization going on in this first, in this 1974 to 1990 period. That's part of that. And then there is a democratic reversal. Again, the third wave reversal starts around 2003. Now what happens right around 2003? The Iraq War, right? Our decision to get into that, and our decision to engage in torture and other things that our allies weren't real thrilled with. And that third world country were seeing us do, and we're like, wait a minute, America's supposed to be different. Why are we following you down this path of democracy when what you're doing suggests that there's no real difference? And that becomes really problematic. So I said all of that just to say, having seen a democratic reversal is not unusual. But there's one thing that is very unusual, and that is we have never seen the reversal of a consolidated democracy. And America has been a consolidated democracy since 1828. That's the date that we usually use. That's when at least 50%, a little more than 50% of American males, to be fair, women weren't voting yet, were given the right to vote. We're all able to vote. There were some constitutional changes. You no longer had to be a landowner to be able to vote. But that is the date. So for nearly 200 years, we have been a consolidated democracy, and we're starting to see that consolidated democracy, the foundation is shaky, right? And that is remarkable. So I think that's why a lot of people are studying this, because it is something that we've never seen before. At least, well, we've never seen before, honestly. And it is a little bit frightening to consider. Sorry, it is my phone. Now, democratic backsliding. Excuse me, I'm going to grab a drink. I'm really glad I didn't dump that in my face, but I almost did. Democratic backsliding has been happening for 19 consecutive years, as of 2024. And I don't think that there is any doubt that it's not going to continue. I mean, just what you're seeing all around the world, in Western Europe, right, in the United States, the bastions of democracy, right, it's not looking good. But all of the entities, and I have some of them listed here, that measure democracy, that measure its quality, and by that I mean things like civil liberties. Are civil liberties respected? Is there a regular election cycle, and are elections free and fair? Can anybody vote? Right? Is voting open? What are some of the other things? Is the press free? Or is it impeded by the government? Is it influenced negatively by the government? All of those things are measured by entities like Freedom House. Freedom House is my favorite, I think, because if you go to the website, and I think I have a QR code if anybody wants to snap on that website. It's on the next slide. Or maybe it's 2 slides, but it's on there. And I think it's still working. If it doesn't, it's freedomhouse.org. But I like Freedom House because the methodology is easy to understand, and their methodology is in there. If you're really interested and you want to go look, they have a map that you can scroll over that shows you how freedom in the world in any country has advanced or receded. Right, so it's very user friendly. But Freedom House has existed since 1941. It was founded by Eleanor Roosevelt and Wendell Willkie. Right, so a Democrat and a Republican. The only Republican, I think, who ran in the 1940 presidential election who was interventionist, so that's probably why he lost. But nonetheless, they founded Freedom House because they knew that being able to monitor and support democracies abroad was going to be really key in keeping the Soviet Union at bay at some point. Right? They were a little bit prescient. They could see into the future. They knew what was going to happen. The Economist, which is a economic magazine, journal. They also measure democracy. The VDEM, which is the Varieties of Democracy Index, that's a really good source as well. The Global State of Democracy Index, the Democracy Perception Index, Poly4, which I think is now Poly5. All of these are quality resources if you're interested in this topic and interested in monitoring, whether it be the United States or any other country, and checking out how they're doing on democracy. Excuse me. I listed them up there. I don't have all of the QR codes or links, but I'm happy to send anybody who wants a list. So generally speaking, any country that achieves a significant level of democracy and then experiences a significant erosion of that progress is considered to be a backslider, a democratic backslider. So just getting that definition out there as well. There's a couple of different types of backsliding, right? There's something called grievance-filled illiberalism, and these terms aren't really, I don't care what you want to call it, but the dynamics are important, and I think you can see some of these dynamics in our country as well, but let me define these. Grievance-filled illiberalism, basically that is saying that the liberal institutions in America, for example, which would be, oh gosh, USAID, that would be a liberal institution. The political system is an institution in itself, so free and fair elections, right, where everybody can vote, that's an institution, a liberal institution. What others? Civil rights, right? The fact that some of the liberal institutions that have been the foundation of this country, I mean, honestly, you could look at the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, anything there, right, could fall into that category. The fact that those things exist for some people is such a grievance that they believe that we need to fight against that. That's something to be shamed. That's a shameful thing. It's a harmful thing. Opportunistic authoritarianism, where a populist maybe just arises from somewhere out of nowhere and gets a huge following, and people are so enamored with him and what he says that nobody cares that he's an authoritarian. And then entrenched interest revanchism. Now, it's okay if you do not know what revanchism means. Every time I use that word, I have to look it up every single time. I only use that word when I talk about this stuff in a particular class or a particular talk. But revanchism basically is people who have some kind of a grudge and now are looking for revenge. And basically, this is, for example, if a military had run a country for, I don't know, decades, and suddenly there was a democratic election, and maybe they even allowed the election, but the election pushes them out of office. Now they're out of office, they want revenge. And so they're going to try to come back because they had an entrenched interest in keeping power, or they have an entrenched interest in keeping power, which is basically the power and what they can kind of get for themselves off of that power. I think you can see little elements of all of this in what America is actually going through at this moment, right? We do have that kind of a leader, unfortunately. There are people who are ready to tear down institutions because they have a grievance and they believe that their own status in life would somehow be better if just those people over there didn't have so much and couldn't vote. And I do think that there are people who, because they feel like they don't have power any longer, which I would argue isn't even true, that they have this grudge that they need to pursue so that they can get their their power back. I want to do this example up here, and I made up a country's name because I didn't want to be too leading, I guess. And I think this might drive home a little bit of what we're seeing. Let's take this country of Fredonia. We used Fredonia a lot at the CIA when we were doing examples and didn't want to talk about a particular country. So Fredonia, it's been a victim of unfair trade agreements, or so it says, right? They believe that inside the borders of Fredonia, there's a significant population that has some kind of agreements. The government has pointed at a particular minority group as a cause of that grievance. Fredonia's government has threatened its neighbors with invasion. Because you can create a rally around the flag effect, right? That will make people love you even if you're not that great. Fredonia has a majority population that pines for its old era of greatness, and it's recently seen the rise of populist leaders that point to liberals and to communists as a cause of social unrest. Now, how many of you hearing that immediately thought, well, yeah, that's the United States, right? I see a lot of hands and a lot of heads nodding. This could also be said of Italy in 1923. This could also be said of Germany in 1933, right? This could also be said of Hungary today, right? There is, if people really get upset, outraged over using the term fascism, right? But that is unfortunately what we're seeing rise here, right? The comparisons are not false. The comparisons are not alarmist. I think the comparisons are actually necessary. And obviously we have all of this stuff. I mean, you can turn on CNN and just watch it for an hour and you're going to see all of these things kind of mentioned, right? It's a little bit frightening. So why now? Like, why is this happening now in the United States? I think that's a question that, I mean, I ponder this all the time. I don't understand it. I would think that maybe 2004, 2005, when Americans started to realize, hey, my country is torturing people, that's not a good thing, that there would have been such an outrage that we were veering away from our democratic values that we would never allow something like what we're seeing now to happen. And that's not actually happening, and that surprises me a little bit. But there's been a failure of capitalism, right? That, you can't deny that. Capitalism is the best system out there, right? I don't want to suggest that I am not a capitalist. I am a capitalist, but capitalism needs to be regulated, right? There has to be laws. Human nature is not altruistic. We will exploit people if we have the opportunity to, and we see that every day. So there has been a failure of capitalism where people at the top are getting richer and they're taking wealth away from people at the bottom who are doing much, much worse just in general. There's a frequently false belief that the ruling group, and by the ruling group, I do mean white people. I mean, I'm sorry, but I do mean white people, are being oppressed somehow, right? I have never felt oppressed in my life as a white person. I might now a little bit because you know, I don't feel like my government represents me, but that's not because I'm white. It's because I believe in the Constitution. But there is this belief that the ruling group is being oppressed, the failure of democracy to address challenges like inequality. We can't address climate change. In fact, we're doing things to actually harm, I think, the ability of scientists and entrepreneurs to find solutions to climate change issues. There's a decline in civic education. I mean, I teach really, really smart students. I don't want to suggest that I don't, right? And I love you guys if you're watching. But when they come into my American government class, I'm amazed at how little they know about how the government is supposed to work, right? They don't understand what the bureaucracy does. And again, these are really smart people, but they're not being taught these things. And you can't just have knowledge that nobody's given to you. So civic education has failed dramatically in this country. There's too much money, big money in politics. That's also a huge problem. And there is polarization that's fueled by social media. Right? I mean, when I was a kid, when I was college age, that stuff didn't exist. I dare say that's the case for all of us in this room, for most of us in this room. What did that mean? It meant that if I had a grievance with a neighbor, I took it up with that neighbor. If I had a grievance with a friend, I took it up with that friend. I didn't snark at them through a third party, which would be, you know, Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, right? There was more personal interaction. You saw your neighbors as human beings, and we just don't do that anymore. Which is a shame. I think all of these things, and there's probably other factors. Does anybody have any others that you would put on this list that come to mind?
Well, income inequality, but that's a failure of capitalism.
Yeah, and I totally agree. That is a huge problem. It is patently unfair for people to have their taxes go up, so that some billionaire can have a tax cut, and the billionaire's not going to feel. I mean, he can have a tax hike, and he's not going to feel that. But if you take $50 away from a family who's working 2 or 3 jobs, they're going to feel that. That's going to hurt a lot. That might impact their kids being able to eat at school or to play a sport. right? It means a lot. Other thoughts?
Consolidation of legacy media.
Gosh, yes. Yes, the consolidation of legacy media is another one of these, where you have like one perspective, and that perspective is being shaped, unfortunately, by people who are afraid of the government. That's a huge one. Any others? Well, you might, some others may come to you in just a second. So, a couple of indicators of democracy, and I think I might have said most of these when I was going through the Freedom House, how they measure. There's multiple political parties with free and fair elections and no barriers to citizens voting. I mean, as I say these, I'm guessing that everybody in your minds are going through, but we don't have that here anymore. Or that's under threat here now. A respect for the rule of law, an independent judiciary, a free press, a vibrant civil society. And when I say civil society, that refers to basically what we do as people who come together and solve problems without the government's help. Now, this group basically is a representation of civil society, right? We come, we educate ourselves, we maybe try to problem solve, at least on the local level, civil society. And thankfully, we can still come and join and talk about these things, which I'm really grateful for. And then also, civil liberties are respected by the government, right? There's no interference in the ability of the press to be free, or there's nobody leaning on judges. There's nobody threatening reporters. There's nobody rounding up people at a peaceful protest, right? Oh yeah.
So what about using the military against people?
Lordy, that definitely should not be happening. When I mentioned this on social media this morning, there was something about this that just seemed eerily familiar when I'm seeing armored vehicles in DC, and when I am watching people like just taking down people so brutally on the streets, and hear heads hitting the pavement, and it's horrible. And I'm like, what? Where have I seen this before? And I'm like, oh yeah, when I was in Beijing 20 years ago, there was a police presence like this there. Absolutely. I left an airport in Beijing once, and unfortunately, unbeknownst to me, got into an unmarked cab, and the police tracked us down, an unregistered cab, which are illegal in Beijing. And the police tracked us down before we got out of the airport parking lot and stopped us. And I thought, oh crap, I'm going to prison. This is great. And I didn't, thank God. But this is what that reminds me of, right? That kind of surveillance are definitely the indicators of democracy in trouble, right? It's huge trouble.
I can think of using AI and face recognition, everything that invades our privacy, that our sovereignty.
Exactly.
Used against us.
No, exactly. I think so too. I think that's a great one, a great example. When you are not free from government intrusion, that's a scary place to be at.
Also, the Supreme Court is no longer impartial.
That's also unfortunately very true.
Can you repeat what they're saying?
I'm so sorry. The Supreme Court is no longer partial.
Impartial.
It's very partial. The Supreme Court is no longer impartial. And that's very true. When you have a majority decision that basically gives the president immunity, or at least is interpreted as giving the president immunity, that's a very scary place that we're at right now because, as I recall, one of the dissenting justices actually said during that particular deliberation, so if the president wanted to shoot his opposition and called out the army to go assassinate his political opponent, he could do that, and there was actually some discussion. Well, yeah, because he's the commander-in-chief. He can tell the army what to do. Yeah, no. That's really horrifying if that's where we are as a country. I want to talk a little bit about indicators, and we have been already, right, when we're talking about these over here. There's a couple of others. I did actually, indicators for backsliding, that's right. I wanted to stress the opposite, right, because I do want to drive home the amount of trouble that we're in here, right? And not just here. There are indicators that Western Europe is also having some struggles. Fortunately, they seem to keep rejecting the extreme authoritarian parties. They have more sense than we do, apparently. But they still pop up, right? They still have maybe 20 or 30% support of their citizens, of their voters. So when a country is about to backslide or well along the path of backsliding, you start to see movement here in these categories. So there would be erosion of institutional checks and balances, and we see that with the Congress refusing to do anything to stop the authoritarian moves of this president. Eroding press freedom, as we've already talked about, the weakening of civil society, manipulating the electoral system. And I'm sorry, but when you are talking about putting a military presence in the streets of multiple democratic cities, that is electoral interference, because you know that in November of 2026, those armed troops are going to be near polling places, and they're going to say it's to keep the peace. It's not to keep the peace, it's to intimidate you so that you will not go and vote for the other guy. I mean, that's basically how that works. Also, it's important though, that's almost a good sign because they're scared, right? They know they don't have, I mean, it's a sign I don't want to see continue, but they know that they don't have majority support in this country, and they know that if they don't intimidate us, they're going to lose a free and fair election. So in a sense, that should give you just a little bit of hope, right? There's also a politicization of the security and intelligence services. Right now, according to the press, there's a grand jury that's been impaneled to investigate Barack Obama, John Brennan, former CIA director, former DNI Jim Clapper, Hillary Clinton, and Jim Comey, and I think one or two other people, for trying to deny Trump his electoral victory by investigating Russian collusion or Russian interference in the election. And I'm just like, wait, you're going to do what now? First of all, it's past the statute of limitations. But if you are those people, and granted, most of those people do have some means, they're also aging and shouldn't have to spend their means on defending themselves legally in a court of law, right? So using the intelligence, using the security services, using the Department of Justice to target your enemy is a really, really scary place to be. Using the legal framework to exert authoritarian control, right? This could be, doing something that's legal, like declaring a state of emergency, but then letting it go on longer. The law gives Trump 30 days to have the National Guard in D.C., but they have already authorized a 2-month extension, right? Unless Congress approves it, the 2-month extension is not legal. But unfortunately, what he's done right now so far is mostly within the bounds of legality. Control over the educational system, trying to extort money from Yale and Columbia and Princeton and Harvard and UCLA and so many other schools. I think they're going after George Mason now in Fairfax, Virginia, because of this very weak, very shaky premise that there's anti-Semitism that hasn't been addressed on those campuses. Anti-Semitism is bad, but does not require a federal response unless the school is actually engaging in it itself, right? The school should be expected to take steps to make Jewish students feel safe, absolutely. Jewish students shouldn't be kept off their campus by a protest. That's wrong, that's just wrong. But the remedy to that is not federal oversight over a school's curriculum or over who is actually allowed to enroll in that school. That's just kind of frightening. It's going to evolve into control over curriculum, which also is not a good place to be. Which also walks us into what they're trying to do with the Smithsonian, and go into the Smithsonian and basically control and edit, and censor. The real word is censor. What is being presented in the exhibits. The White House does not have the authority legally to do that. The Smithsonian Institution is not an executive branch institution. They get a little money from Congress, but it's mostly a privately funded thing. You can pay money to the Smithsonian and become a member. Corruption and graft. I don't think I really need to elaborate there when it comes to the current leadership of this country. I'll just let that one go. And then creating an us versus them, right? More and more often we're seeing attempts to divide our society. I've seen this happen, obviously, in Germany with the Germans versus the Jews. In Italy, it was more fascist versus a socialist. Mussolini himself was not particularly he was anti-Semitic. He did not believe in murdering Jews. at the end, when he had a relationship with Hitler, Jews who were taken to the northern part of Italy, which Hitler actually controlled by that time, they were taken to death camps. There were actually a surprisingly small number of Jews in Mussolini's Italy. And left to his own devices, he would not have, he wasn't pushing for a final solution there, but Hitler sure was. And I would also stress, putting them in concentration camps is no less egregious. I just want to get that on the record. I'm not trying to make light of it. But we do know what comes next, right? It's not just going to be immigrants. It's not just going to be brown people, which is really where the bar is now. Because there's a whole lot of citizens and a whole lot of people who are here legally who are in concentration camps in Florida right now, which is horrifying. I never thought I'd see that in my country. Not during my lifetime. I know it's happened, but not during my lifetime. So all of these things are an indicator of a country that is backsliding, that is not becoming more perfect in its democracy. We're not becoming a more perfect union. We're becoming a much more flawed union, and it should frighten us all. And then there's some symptoms that will come from this process. There's a little bit of overlap here, and I'm not going to stress all of these. But I do want to stress a couple of them. There will be, because of what the government is doing, a reduced faith in these institutions. People are going to lose the memory of, you know what, our country was working pretty well before. The Department of Justice, the Department of Commerce, the EPA, the things that were giving us clean air and clean water, they were working pretty darn well before. I didn't have, emphysema just from walking out my driveway to get my mail 10 years ago, but I might now. We're going to forget that. We're going to forget that ever worked, which is one of the reasons they want to interfere in our education system. But they want to actively undermine those institutions so that they become ineffective and that we're willing to accept their solutions to these problems. There will be more entrenched polarization. If you think that this is bad, it's going to get worse. The media will fail to do its job increasingly, even more. May openly start to pander to an autocrat. There'll be low social trust, where we don't trust each other anymore. It's a scary place to be when you don't trust your neighbors, when you wonder if people want to harm you, when you wonder if people have your best interest at heart, who you probably had dinner with, a couple of years ago. You were hanging out with these people. Now, because you're on different sides of a political ideology, they may want to wish you harm. There's going to be even lower judicial independence, and we're already seeing that now. A rise in nationalism, and in our case, it's going to be Christian nationalism. You can hear certain leaders giving voice to this all the time. Pete Hegseth has been sending around video clips of pastors who claim that women should not be voting, and they are putting some kind of biblical justification for that in these sermons. It's sickening. There will be executive overreach that will not be rebuffed by the legislative or judicial branches. We're seeing that. And also, we're going to increasingly embrace populists. There's an argument to be made that people could grow tired of the current leader and won't want to go back to normalcy, but they will want to grab onto another populist. Another person who will turn heads, will get a lot of attention, will say the right things, will pander to the right people, might even pander to the same kinds of grievances, and that we just keep going down this path towards, increasing confidence, really, but increasing authoritarianism, just not under the same leader, which is also very concerning. Now, I've already talked about some of these comparisons, so I'll stop there. This is the QR code for Freedom House. If anybody wants to snap that real quick, I think, do I need to move my head? Yeah, like my head's that tall. Somebody was thinking it. I think it's still working. If it's not working, let me know. Okay, all right, good. I used one of those free trial QR code generators, and I'm pretty sure I'm still within that 7-day range, but I'm not totally sure. Also, you will note this slide. This is from the Freedom House website. This is a map of Democratic backsliders since 2005, so the last 20 years, and you notice that the United States clearly is on this. There's some other countries that I honestly don't think that I would want to be grouped with if I were the president. That was just in case. So now, I want to hear from you. If you guys have questions, that's great. I'll answer those questions. There's a mic in the back also, so raise your hand so she can come and get to you. So if you have questions or if you have an idea about what we can do to push back, right, to bolster support for our democratic institutions, I want to hear that. I think we all want to hear that. Cheers.
Do you feel that there may be considerable backlash for people who traditionally haven't voted because they've been denied things like Medicaid and some of the things that cause them to be more replaced at one time, but now they've lost it, that there may be a surge of voting in the right direction to get rid of that?
I hope so. I think when you watch the news, I'm sorry, he asked if I thought that there could be backlash from people who, for example, have received Medicaid, who are now not going to receive Medicaid. Could there be backlash that could work in their favor, basically? I think that there's a really good chance of that happening. I've seen videos of legislators, congressmen especially, around the country who are going to town halls and they're being confronted by people who are really angry because they're losing their health care. And these, in many cases, are people who voted for this, theoretically, but now they're realizing, oh my gosh, this is really happening. This is not what I wanted. And there's going to be some damages, not just to me personally, but to our community. Hospitals are going to close. Nobody voted for that. So I think so, and I hope so.
Yeah, I think kind of related to that, voter apathy is a huge problem. So a lot of barriers to voting. A lot of countries have a national holiday to vote, try to push towards that. But maybe as we're trying to register and encourage people in the area to try to get up to participate in early voting, because there's a much broader window, much easier.
Encouraging people to vote, making it easier, going out and encouraging people to vote, doing voter registration drives. All of those things I think are a great solution. And I think now if you can pull up your phone and show people some of these short clips from town halls. Look, people are realizing this. It's not just something that people are saying on social media to get you scared so you vote for their guy. This is really happening. So I think that's a great idea, and I think it's necessary, but I think that there has to be an educational component with this. I mean, there just has to be, because people, I don't understand how people can be disengaged, honestly, but there are a lot of people who are disengaged. We've got to reach those people, for sure.
One thing that I hope you emphasize is under education, reiterating history that has been changed. I think you can dehumanize a group by taking away their positive history. I think what we have to do is be adamant about repeating history. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. He said one of the things that we need to do is to be out there reiterating and making sure that history is not lost, and that history can be is being really taken away from certain groups, right? Their history is being denied to them. If you think about the Smithsonian and, for example, the government trying to go into the African American History Museum to make sure, for example, that there's nothing that defames white people. You can't have an African American History Museum that is telling truth, that is telling accurate history, that does not make white people look pretty bad, right? It's just not possible, and I don't feel like, as a white person myself, that I need to be offended by that. That's the truth, unfortunately. I'm responsible for my behavior, right? For what I do, for how I treat people. I can't be offended that other white people did really bad things. We need to not deny people the right to have their stories told. Absolutely. I think that's yeah.
May I suggest two items?
Sure.
One is, many of us spend a lot of time looking into the history of black people. But but how many of us get out of our comfort zone and get to know those who are not part of our normal living, and get to know other people so there truly is community? That's one thing we can do. Secondly, and I say this from experience, is the institutional church. The institutional church that is evangelical supports the administration. The institutional church that does not keeps their mouth shut. And in our congregations that do not support, we need to talk to the leaders and tell them, let's tell the truth.
Those were two excellent points. Absolutely. Every night I go to bed and I pray, dear God, wake the church up. Because if the church woke up, we could stop this.
Right.
Absolutely.
Would you like a little hat on that for sanitation?
Sure.
Ask the question.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I think one thing that's,
To your face.
one thing, can anybody hear this?
I'll repeat it if they can.
Close.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's better.
One thing I think that is encouraging is, and we can't do it, but
Keep going.
all these people who may have voted, say, for Trump, voted on one issue, and it may be, they don't like other countries' tariffs, or they they just don't like a single issue. But what they do is they ignore the larger perspective. And I saw a poll that before the election, most people approved and thought these agencies which are being dismantled, they approved of them. But they voted against them by voting for Trump. And I think the big factor is you can get them out of thinking about that one important issue to them when, for example, we're destroying things people care about, like FEMA. Well, people in disasters count on FEMA, but when they won't get help now, they're going to feel the hurt. And there are many, many of these issues, cutting air traffic controls, or people who, find people who are taking care of the missiles.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I personally feel a lot better knowing that our nuclear reactors and our nuclear bombs are under the supervision, under the care of people who actually know what they're doing, and not some 19-year-old who is just shoved in there from working for Elon for a while, right, to go in there and make a bunch of cuts. I prefer there to be air traffic controllers that are actually competent doing their jobs when I fly. I'm still a little bit scared to fly, honestly, right now. So absolutely, and we need to make sure that people understand how much that impacts them.
We have several people who have questions, so if you can keep your comments concise and,
Can you tell us more about what happened in Italy and Germany to reverse course?
Well, unfortunately, that would be the war. I mean, honestly, they were pretty, Germany especially was pretty committed, at least the government was, and all people in power in Germany were pretty committed to Nazism all the way through until they lost the war. Obviously, there was some dwindling support towards the end, 43, 44, 45. When Dresden is getting firebombed, I think you start to see the tide, at least amongst the average German, that support falls. In Italy, they did start to have some economic issues before 1943, when Mussolini was basically kicked out of his position by his own party. His own party eventually turned against him because the economy was beginning to suffer. The war was not going well for them. A lot of people in Italy didn't like the relationship that Mussolini had with Hitler, because, like, you know, Mussolini's fascism was one thing, and it was bad. Hitler's version of fascism was a totally different thing, and nobody liked the idea that people were being rounded up and put in camps in some other country in Eastern Europe and eventually disappeared and killed, right? Nobody wanted to see that. But basically, it was economic disaster linked to the war and the war, unfortunately. And I hope, beyond hope, that that's not what we have to go through up here in America.
Maybe 2 more questions?
And there was a question up here too.
Yeah, there's one that's back here.
Can everybody hear me, or should I just?
Barely.
Okay, should I just,
Keep it close, keep it close to your mouth.
Okay, I got it.
There, that's it.
I really appreciate the comments about voter registration, and I think that we all need to do as much as we possibly can to do that. I've heard a statistic that Tennessee is not necessarily a red state, it's a non-voting state.
Exactly.
So if we can get to all of those people, but what I'm concerned about is by the time we reach the time to vote, things are going to be changed so badly, it's going to be harder to overthrow. So I'd like your thoughts about the gerrymandering that's happening in Texas, and then California's response. This is the first time in my life I actually support that, that there's pushback and kind of fighting fire with fire. But could that also go out of control? So I'd like your thoughts on the current gerrymandering situation.
Okay, so the Texas situation is something that's unprecedented. There has never been a president make that request of a governor ever in the history of the country. It's just not something that happens. Redistricting is linked to the census that happens. I was going to say, is the word deciannually? 10 times 100? Yeah, it's not annually, century. Yeah, but every 10 years. Yeah. I know there's a term for it, I just can't come up with it. So every 10 years there's supposed to be a census for the purpose of reallocating seats. You don't do that in the middle of a 10-year period. It is illegal, and they're gerrymandering. It's basically based on race. You can't avoid, if you're going to get 5 more Republican seats, you're going to have to gerrymander based on race. And on the presumption that races vote in a particular way. Like, it's just the facts, unfortunately. I think that the pushback from Democratic states, California, I think that there's going to be a ballot initiative to approve it, I believe, very soon. New York is talking about it. A couple of other states are talking about it. Illinois, I believe Governor Pritzker is for it. If that is what has to be done, I think it is time for Democrats and every good-hearted person who doesn't want to see us evolve into fascism needs to support this kind of thinking. We're no longer at when they go low, we go high. We can't win, we can't save the republic if that's going to be our approach to it. And I think we should go for it. I think it's a great idea. And if we can find more creative ways to push back on that kind of stuff, we should find them.
Thank you for being here. Just for your information, PBS, our beloved public broadcasting system, showed a program, a Rick Steves program on fascism in Europe, covering the Mussolini and Hitler and other regimes historically with very excellent archival video. So I commend that. And the second thing is, on the concentration camp in Florida, ICE is, according to the Washington Post, they revealed that ICE plans to expand their capacity around the country for these camps.
I saw that.
Yes, even in Tennessee.
We know there are lots and lots of questions. One more, and then we need to sort of see if we can. Okay. Kathy, but questions.
Her question was answered. Do you want to look at it?
No,
She
they
got
got mine.
Yeah, somebody else actually got her question.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I can probably just say it. I want to talk about voter suppression. There is a investigative reporter. His name is Greg Palast, Palast. You go to gregpalast.com. He has it's actually a frightening documentary he did about voter suppression. like one person in Georgia was able to challenge the voting rights of 135,000 people, including a black retired Army colonel, and he was denied his right to vote. The person had to provide absolutely no justification. So voter suppression and that whole issue isn't getting enough attention.
Yeah.
And just one other thing is about, we talk about illegal women voters, registering people, registering. The issue is getting the people to the polls, getting them out of their comfort zone and getting to the polls.
Yeah.
And, as someone mentioned earlier, yes, this is a non-voting state, and there are actually, I believe, more Democrats registered in the state than Republicans.
I wish they would get out and vote. I really do. Yeah.
And we're a nonpartisan organization. We're not here to advocate for any party. We're here to talk about issues. So that's probably the last question. And if you want to kind of wrap things up.
That's fair. And to be fair, I wish every American would just go vote. Because honestly, if people were engaged enough to vote, no matter which party they voted for, they would probably also be engaged enough to be educating themselves about issues. And I think that actually makes a difference and makes people make better informed decisions when it comes to that. So thank you guys. I really appreciate being here, and I appreciate all these questions and all these good thoughts. So thank you, and I hope you guys have a great Sunday afternoon.